I didn't expect to see anyone there that night. The cemetery was silent, the air heavy with the weight of loss, and I had come alone, like always. I wasn't a man who cried, not publicly, not even in private, but standing before my son's gravestone. The pain clawed at my chest like an animal that refused to let go. And then I saw her. She was curled up at the foot of my son's grave, wrapped in a tattered blanket, her arms clutching something tightly to her chest. A girl, barely in her late teens, thin to the bone, shivering. Her tangled hair fell over her face, and yet there was something hauntingly familiar about her. I stepped forward, my polished shoes crunching against the gravel. She flinched but didn't run. Instead, she slowly lifted her head, revealing eyes so hollow, so drenched in sorrow, that for a moment I forgot to breathe. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't think you'd ever come." Something about her words sent a chill down my spine. "You know my son?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, broken, bitter. "I knew him better than anyone." That was impossible. My son, Liam, had been raised in privilege, surrounded by wealth, living a life of comfort. This girl, this homeless girl, she had no place in that world. And yet, she was sitting here, guarding his grave like a protector of something sacred. I narrowed my eyes. "Who are you?" She hesitated, clutching the bundle in her arms even tighter. The streetlights barely reached us, but I could see her fingers trembling. I don't know how to tell you." I took a step closer, the cold biting at my skin. "Then start from the beginning." She let out a shaky breath. "My name is Emma, and I was the last person Liam ever spoke to before he died." My world froze. Liam had died in an accident, a car crash. He had been alone. That's what I was told. That's what I had believed. But now, this girl was telling me something entirely different. I clenched my fists. "That's a lie." She didn't flinch. If anything, she looked at me with something akin to pity. "It's the truth. But I don't think you're ready to hear it." My patience snapped. "Tell me." She hesitated, then, as if making up her mind, she loosened her grip on the bundle in her arms. I hadn't paid much attention to it before, but now, as the moonlight hit the fabric, I felt my breath hitch. It was a jacket, Liam's jacket, the one he had worn the night he died. And beneath it, a single notebook with his name scrawled on the cover. "I tried to give this to you before," Emma murmured. "But your people wouldn't let me near you. They said I was a liar, that I wanted money." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want money, Mr. Holloway. I just wanted you to know the truth about your son." I wanted to believe she was lying, that this was some kind of scam. But as I reached for the notebook, my hands shook. I recognized Liam's handwriting instantly. I flipped open the first page, and my entire world shattered. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the first page of Liam's notebook. His handwriting, messy yet unmistakable, sprawled across the paper. It was dated the night he died. "If something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth. Dad, I know you won't believe it at first, but if you're reading this, please just listen." I turned the page, my heart pounding. Emma sat still, her fingers gripping the sleeves of her oversized jacket as if bracing for my reaction. "What truth?" My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard. "Liam didn't die the way they told you. He didn't crash that car because he was reckless. He was trying to save me. The ground beneath me might as well have crumbled. My son, the boy I had raised, the heir to my billion-dollar empire, had died protecting this homeless girl?" I clenched my jaw. "Explain." Emma's lips trembled. "That night, Liam found me in an alley. I had nowhere to go. He was different from everyone else. He didn't look at me like I was nothing." She let out a breath. "He gave me his jacket and told me to get in the car, so he could take me somewhere safe. But before we could leave, they showed up." I felt something dark twist in my gut. "Who?" Emma hesitated, her gaze darting to the gravestone as if asking for Liam's forgiveness. "The people who wanted him dead." My pulse roared in my ears. "That's impossible," I snapped. Liam had no enemies. Emma exhaled shakily, gripping her knees. Not the kind you knew about. I didn't like her tone. I didn't like any of this. But as I looked at Liam's notebook, at the frantic way he had scribbled the words, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. I flipped another page. If anything happens to me, it's because of them. The people I trusted. The ones who want to make sure I never speak again. The world around me blurred. Who had betrayed my son? Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Liam knew something. Something that could ruin the people closest to him. My stomach twisted. Who? She hesitated. Your business partner. Mark. A surge of rage shot through me. Mark had been my closest ally for years. He had helped build my company. He had been at my side during Liam's funeral, pretending to grieve. I gritted my teeth. That's a bold accusation. Emma nodded. I know, but I can prove it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. I took it with shaking fingers. It was a torn page from Liam's notebook. Mark thinks I don't know, but I do. I know about the stolen money, the offshore accounts, the missing files, and I know what he's planning to do to me. My vision blurred with fury. I had buried my son thinking it was an accident, but now the truth was clawing its way to the surface, and I was going to make them pay. Emma watched me carefully. I tried to tell the police, she murmured, but no one believed me. I'm just some homeless girl, right? Her voice was filled with bitterness, but there was something else beneath it. Pain. Real pain. I clenched my fists. My entire life had been built on power, on control. I had thought money could solve anything. But here I was, standing over my son's grave, learning that I'd been blind to the one thing that truly mattered. My son's death wasn't an accident. It was a murder, and the people responsible were still walking free. A slow, cold determination settled over me. I turned to Emma. You said you can prove it. Then show me everything. Emma hesitated, as if she had expected me to call her a liar. But when she saw the steel in my gaze, she nodded. I'll take you to the last place Liam was before he died, she said. But you need to be ready for what you'll find. I didn't hesitate. I've never been more ready in my life. Emma led me through the dimly lit streets, her footsteps light but purposeful. She didn't ask if I was ready. She knew the answer. My mind was a storm, replaying every moment of my son's life, every conversation I had with Mark, every blind trust one had placed in the wrong people. We stopped outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. A chill ran down my spine. This is where Liam brought me that night, Emma whispered. And this is where they found him. I clenched my fists. What happened here? She inhaled sharply. Liam had proof. He was going to expose them. I gritted my teeth. And they made sure he never did. Emma nodded. But they didn't know he gave me copies. My heart pounded. Copies. Emma reached into her tattered backpack, pulling out a USB drive. Everything Liam found. Financial records, voice recordings, even video evidence. He wasn't just investigating Mark. He uncovered an entire operation. My blood ran cold. Operation. Emma's expression darkened. Money laundering. Embezzlement. And worse. I felt my stomach tighten. I had spent my life building a legacy, but Mark had been poisoning it from the inside. My son had known. He had tried to stop it. And they had killed him for it. I took the USB drive, my grip tightening around it. I swear to you, Emma, I said, my voice like steel. I will burn them to the ground. Emma exhaled, her relief evident. I've been waiting for someone to believe me. I turned to her, my mind racing. Why did Liam trust you? She hesitated. Because I saved him once. I frowned. What do you mean? Emma hugged her arms around herself. Months before he died, Liam found me on the streets. I was starving, barely conscious. He took me to a shelter, paid for my medical bills. He saved my life. My chest tightened. I had no idea. He told me he couldn't stand seeing people suffer while others had everything, Emma continued. He was nothing like you. The words stung, but I deserved them. That night, standing before a rundown warehouse with a homeless girl who had more loyalty to my son than the people in my inner circle, I realized something. Liam had been a better man than me. And now it was my turn to make things right. I didn't wait. The next morning, I contacted a private investigator, the best in the business. "Find me everything on Mark," I ordered. "I want his entire history, every deal he's made, every person he's paid off." The investigator nodded. "This won't be cheap." I gave him a cold smile. "I don't care what it costs." I had spent my life building wealth. Now, I was going to use it to destroy the man who had betrayed my son. The investigation moved quickly. It turned out Mark was dirtier than I imagined. He had been siphoning money from my company for years, using offshore accounts to hide millions. He had powerful friends in high places, judges, politicians, men who would cover for him if things went south. But he hadn't counted on one thing.
Me.
And he sure as hell hadn't counted on the evidence Liam left behind. I sent my investigator to deliver a single message to Mark. I know. That night, Mark called me. "You've been looking into things you shouldn't," he said, his voice tight. I leaned back in my chair, gripping Liam's notebook. "You killed my son." Silence. Then a low chuckle. "I think you're mistaken." My rage boiled over.
"No, Mark.
"The only mistake I made was trusting you." He exhaled. "Listen, you're emotional. But you don't want to go down this road." I let my silence drag out. "You don't have proof," he added. I smiled coldly. "That's where you're wrong." Mark went quiet, and for the first time I could hear it, fear. I didn't go to the police.
Not yet.
Mark had too many people in his pocket. If I moved too soon, he'd make the evidence disappear. I needed to hit him where it hurt. His power. His reputation. His control. So I did something I had never done before. I called the media. I leaked Liam's evidence to every major news outlet in the country. By morning, headlines exploded. "Billionaire betrayed," exposing the dark secrets of Mark Hastings. "Shocking new evidence reveals the truth behind Liam Holloway's death." Mark's empire crumbled overnight. Banks froze his accounts. His business partners cut ties. And then, the police finally had no choice but to act. When they arrested Mark, he was furious. "You think this is over?" he spat as they dragged him away. "You think this makes you a hero?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice.
"No.
This makes me a father who finally did the right thing." For the first time, Mark looked afraid. Because he knew. I wasn't done yet. I found Emma at Liam's grave later that evening. She was kneeling, her fingers tracing his name on the headstone. "It's over," I said quietly. "Mark's in custody. The world knows the truth." Emma nodded, but there were tears in her eyes. "It won't bring Liam back." I swallowed the lump in my throat.
"No.
"But it'll make sure no one else suffers because of him." Emma exhaled shakily.
He would have liked that."
For a moment, we stood in silence. Then I turned to her. "You have no home," I said. "No family." Emma stiffened. "I don't need your pity." "It's not pity," I said. "It's a second chance. The same one Liam gave you." She hesitated. Then finally she nodded. And just like that, the two people who had loved Liam the most walked away from his grave together, not as strangers, but as family. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth as Emma and I walked away from Liam's grave. I had expected some sense of closure, some finality to the storm raging in my heart. But it never came. Because revenge doesn't bring peace. Justice doesn't erase loss. Emma walked beside me, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice uncertain. I had no answer. My entire life had been consumed with power, wealth, and control. But none of those things had protected my son. And now, the only person left who truly understood him was the homeless girl who had been his last friend. I turned to her. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think it's time we both stop running." Emma frowned. "Running?" I exhaled. From the past. For the first time, she didn't argue. The next morning, my phone rang before sunrise. It was my lawyer. "You're not going to believe this," he said. I sat up. "Try me." He hesitated. Mark made bail. The words sent ice through my veins. I gripped the phone tighter. What? The judge let him walk, he confirmed. Apparently, he has friends in high places. I clenched my teeth. I should have known. Mark had spent years securing allies who could protect him when things went south. He had money, influence. He wasn't going down without a fight. But neither was I. Get me everything we have on him, I ordered. If the law won't stop him, I will. I met with my investigator that afternoon. This isn't over, I told him. Mark's going to try to make a move.
He nodded. He already has.
I stiffened. What do you mean? The investigator slid a folder across the table. He's liquidating assets, moving money, and he's got a flight booked for tomorrow night. My hands curled into fists. He was running. I exhaled slowly. Not on my watch. That evening, I received an anonymous email. No subject. No signature. Just one sentence. Be careful.
They're watching you.
A cold feeling settled in my gut. I knew Mark was desperate, but if he was sending threats, that meant he was getting reckless. And reckless men made mistakes. I was going to make sure this was his last one. I met Emma at a small diner later that night. She glanced at the folder I carried. What's that? I hesitated, then slid it toward her. Everything we have on Mark. She frowned. Why are you showing me this? Because, I said, Liam trusted you. And I need to know if I can do the same. Emma swallowed hard. Then slowly she nodded. You can. And just like that, we became partners in revenge. The next morning, I made my move. I called every media contact I had, every journalist who had covered Liam's case. I leaked the new information, the missing pieces. By noon, Mark's name was all over the news. But it wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in. So I called him. Did you think you could run? I asked. Mark's voice was tight. You're making a mistake. No, Mark, I said coldly. The mistake was yours. And then I hung up. Hours later, my investigator called. We have him. Mark was at a private airstrip, waiting for his plane. But the police were waiting for him. As he was escorted away in cuffs, he finally met my gaze. You think this makes you better than me? He spat. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. No, I said. This makes me the father who finally avenged his son. And for the first time, Mark looked truly afraid. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury didn't even deliberate long. Mark was sentenced to life in prison. As the verdict was read, I exhaled, my grip on Liam's notebook finally loosening. Justice. It wasn't enough. But it was something. I found Emma after the trial. She was standing by the courthouse steps, staring at the city's skyline. What happens now? She asked. I studied her. She had spent her life fighting to survive, just like Liam had fought to protect the truth. You deserve a future, I said. Come work for me. Emma looked stunned. You're offering me a job? No, I said. I'm offering you a chance. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she smiled. Weeks passed. The world moved on, but I never would. One evening, I returned to Liam's grave. The air was still, the city lights flickering in the distance. I placed a single rose on the ground. I hope I made you proud, son, I whispered. And as the wind rustled the trees, I could have sworn I heard his voice. You did, Dad. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, the storm in my chest began to calm. And as I walked away, Emma by my side, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.